Thank you very much, Marcel, for inviting me. Hello to everybody here and to everybody remote. I think that was the very first time I was introduced as doctor, which is quite strange to me because I just recently became my doctorate. Marcel invited me because I told her that I analyzed the Swiss constitution from an environmental perspective. Actually, I'm not a legal scholar, but it was 2 years ago. It was Greenpeace Switzerland which gave me a mandate to analyze the Swiss constitution and to write a brief report about it. And then it was my idea that I thought it's interesting enough not just to write a little report, but to make a book out of it. So actually, when I say it's all there, I mean it's all here. Swiss Constitution, the very foundation of the legal foundation of Switzerland, which is a small booklet of some 200 articles. It was adopted in 1999, but actually big parts of the Constitution are much older than 25 years. The oldest part date back to the late 18th century, and there are also articles which are more recent than 1999, which have been introduced later. So actually, as you probably know, we have quite often votations in Switzerland, and quite often these votations are about amendments of the constitution. Big difference when I say that the oldest parts date back to the 18th century. You know that the oldest existing constitution worldwide is the American one. Next year will be 250 years old, but the American one, it's almost impossible to change, and the Swiss constitution is changed quite often, which makes a big difference, I think. Yeah, well, I analyzed this. The result was this book. I have brought some with me if anyone is interested in German. In French, it will be published in November. And yeah, well, for me it was quite new to look so deeply into this constitution. And to say it very briefly, the result of my work was first. No, now I was too quick. Pardon. First, that actually, if I look whether Switzerland is ready for the Anthropocene, I would say, or for the definitions to come with climate disruption and biodiversity loss and so on, I would say no, but probably no state on this world is ready. When I look at the mitigation side, is Swiss constitution good to prevent environmental degradation? Then I was really amazed. The constitution is very good, which of course leads me to the question, so why is the reality so different? Actually, we have a very good constitution. I will show you a lot of examples. However, as you know, the politics in Switzerland is not very environmental friendly. And so I will try to answer this question, why is reality so far from our legal foundations? And actually, this fact that we have a good constitution when it comes to environment, but we have very different reality, you can see it in a pessimistic or in an optimistic way. The pessimistic way would be not even a good constitution helps. The optimistic way would be to say, hey, we have a common values. And the IPCC report the last IPCC report in Working Group 3, in the chapter of enabling transformation, wrote that most concept of deliberate transformation also emphasize the importance of common goals and principles. And so we can say, hey, we have them. We have our common goals. We have our common principles. We have decided upon them in a democratic way. So let's just do it. And what's right in a common sense of the word, but also what's right in a legal sense of this word. So how I will structure my presentation. First, I will show what's there, what we already have in our constitution. Then, second, I will ask the questions: why are we so far from this from sustainable development? Third, what's missing, mainly on the adaptation side. So how can we adapt to the Anthropocene? And then I will just throw a brief look at the Klimaseniorinnen case. Most probably you have heard about it. The Klimaseniorinnen is this association of old women which sued Switzerland and won before the European Court of Human Rights last year. So I will just briefly look at this. Okay, what's there? Actually, I show you that there is no official English version of the Constitution because English is not a Swiss language, but there is on the website of the Swiss Confederation you can find the Constitution in English. So I use this translation. It says the long-term preservation of natural resources. That's not just this position of the Constitution among others. That's an aim. A very aim of the Constitution is to preserve the natural resources. And I prefer the German version, which says not natural resources, but it says the natural foundations of life. I prefer it like this. The French version is the same as the English here. But actually, the important point is this is a very aim of our state. Then, when you look at the foreign relations, there's one article about foreign policy, and it says that the confederations shall promote internationally respect for human rights and democracy, the peaceful coexistence of peoples, as well as the conservation of natural resources. So it's not only an aim for Switzerland within the country, but also in its foreign policy. Then we have an article called Sustainable Development. I will go back to this point afterwards. And we have an article called The Protection of the Environment. The interesting thing about this article, it was introduced in the very first votations. Women could vote. You probably know that Switzerland was very, very late with giving the suffrage to women, 1971 only. And the very first votation after this was about the environmental protection, and it was accepted by 92%, which is record. So it was really a big success. So we can say there's a huge consensus that we should protect our environment. Okay, I said I will come back to the point of the sustainable development. Sustainability is nowadays a word which is used so often for marketing purposes that it's quite void of meaning. But from a legal point of view, it has a very strict meaning. Actually, the Swiss Constitution says that sustainable development is a balanced and sustainable relationship between nature and its capacity to renew itself on the one side, and the demands placed on it by the population. That's the official text. The legal scholar Anne-Christine Favre says it's a super principle of the Constitution because it's valid for everything we do. Actually, it should apply to everything Switzerland does. I say it should. I mean, the reality, is different. Now, the very term of sustainability, it was coined in the 18th century already, but it was popularized by the Brundtland report. Officially the report was called Our Common Future by the UN, but Brundtland was the main author, so it's usually called Brundtland report. And the Brundtland report said sustainability has three areas of concern, namely ecological, economic, and social. And I find it very, very important that often, and you probably have heard this, it's people talk about 3 pillars of sustainability, and that's nonsense. You don't find the word pillar in the Brundtland report. Brundtland report talks about 3 areas of concern, and that's very important difference, because a pillar, the metaphor of a pillar says when you have 3 pillars, all of them are of the same importance and they are not connected to each other. Every pillar is standing for itself. What Brundtland report said was very different. They said these 3 areas of concern, or these 3 dimensions, they are entangled. They are very much connected to each other. And it doesn't say they have the same importance. And what is rarely quoted when people quoted the definition of Brundtland of what sustainability is, they usually only quote half of the definition. And I show you the second half of the definition. It says sustainable development contains within it 2 concepts. First, concept of needs, in particular the essential needs of the world's poor. So there is the social equity aspect. And second, the idea of limitations. And that's very important because, often neoliberal politicians, they act as if there were no limitations at all. And this gives as a result that the ecological or the environmental dimension of sustainability is, of course, more important than, for instance, the economic. Why? Because natural resources are a resource for economy, but economy is not a resource for environment. So actually you cannot have economic sustainability without ecological. There is a clear priority. And that's also when you look at how the courts in Switzerland decide, they say the ecological dimension has priority. If you have a conflict of interest between economy and environment, the environment is more important. When you go back to the first thought definition, it reads somehow like a 2 pillars definition. Yeah, you have on the one side you have nature and its capacity to renew itself, and on the other side you have the demands placed on it by the population. But if you go to the legal practice, it's clear the environment has priority. Okay, sufficiency is an important point. Sufficiency has a very, very bad reputation in politics. And because I'm working for the Swiss Energy Foundation, at the moment I'm mainly thinking about energy sufficiency. And when I look at the energy debate, the political energy debate, the debate goes as if there were only 2 alternatives. One is to go on using fossil fuels and destroying the planet completely. The other one is harnessing every source of renewable energy or non-fossil energy to build dams everywhere, even in protected areas, and to build new nuclear power plants in order not to use the fossil fuels anymore. But the third alternative would be to use less, and nobody talks about it. Now, when we look at the Constitution, we have several sufficiency articles. For instance, Article 75 is spatial planning, which sets the goal to ensure the appropriate and economic use of land and its properly ordered settlement. Then we have the sufficiency article, the article about alpine transit traffic. It may sound a little bit strange that the Constitution has an article about alpine transit traffic. That's because it was a people's initiative in the 90s, no, in the 80s. And people's initiatives always aim at the constitutional level. And it has the a disposition of sufficiency saying that the capacity of the transit routes in the Alpine region may not be increased. I think it's a very intelligent, very smart. However, at the moment, the Confederation is building a new tunnel through the Gotthard for the highways, which is of course against this article. And then we come to energy policy. The energy policy article says within the scope of their powers, the Confederation and the cantons shall endeavour to ensure a sufficient, diverse, safe, economic and environmentally sustainable energy supply. That's the supply side, and on the demand side, as well as the economic and efficient use of energy. So economic and efficient use. Strangely enough, the Federal Office of Energy, I was talking to them a few weeks ago, they say economic and efficient means efficient. And I said, no, it's economic and efficient. Yeah, but that's because efficient is economic as well. Well, if you interpret a legal text, one of the rules is if something is written there, it has a meaning. So if you have two words, it must have two meanings. Otherwise, there would be only one word. And the only way to understand economic, if it's not efficient, because we have efficient already there, it must be sufficient. If you are interested in more in the details, and if you read French, there's a very interesting doctoral thesis by Dunja Brunner from University of Lausanne, published 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And she says that actually, if we take the constitution seriously, then we could have a circle economy in a very strong sense of the word, and it would fit to what we wouldn't have to change our constitution and our laws. We already have it all there. Okay, so why then? If Dunja Brunner is right, if I am right with what I told you, why then are we so far from where we should be? And there are, of course, several reasons, and I see three fields. First is the decision makers are insufficiently informed. And so the decision makers quite often in Switzerland is the population. We had a votation in February about, there was a people's initiative which wanted to fix the planetary boundaries in the constitution. We could say we wouldn't need this, because if the very aim of Switzerland is the long-term preservation of natural resources, of course, we cannot transgress planetary boundaries. But it was rejected by 3/4 of the. Oh, what's here? You don't have the picture anymore. Here it comes back. So it was rejected by 3/4 of the votes, and I think it had to do with the insufficient information that many people, they simply didn't. They think that Switzerland is fine and we don't transgress the planetary boundaries. So that's one reason. The second reason, flawed democratic procedures. So actually we have a democracy, we have the foundation that we want to preserve natural resources, but then when the laws are made, the procedures may be flawed and the result is not democratic anymore. And the third is weak decision enforcement. When you look at the political debates in the mainly last few months, the political right tried not so much to weaken the laws, the environmental laws, but they tried to weaken the enforcement of the constitution, of the environmental law. And the weak decision enforcement has also, unfortunately, its basis in the constitution. There is a very strange article saying that the jurisdiction of the Federal Supreme Court may not challenge acts of the Federal Assembly or the Federal Council. Federal Council is the executive, Federal Assembly is the Parliament. So if the Parliament makes a law which is against the Constitution, the Federal Tribunal must not challenge this law, but must apply it, even if it's against the Constitution. That's very strange, and this is also particular Swiss. You don't find it in any other state. It has also a very strange article saying applicable law. The Federal Supreme Court and the other judicial authorities apply the federal acts and international law. So this Constitution does not say that the Constitution itself must be applied, but just the laws, the acts. Of course, the Constitution is important for the tribunals. But if you have a conflict between Constitution and the law, then the law is more important. It's complete nonsense, but it's one of the reasons why we have such a weak enforcement. On the other side, we must say Germany, for instance, has a very strong constitutional jurisdiction. And there has been a beautiful decision in 2021 that the highest constitutional court was forcing the government to pursue higher ambition in climate policy. However, even in Germany, it did not really. The government changed the law then, but it didn't change its practice. Okay, now what's missing? I'm in my book. I make a lot of proposition what could be changed. I think what's important when you think about what is missing, first of all, and almost nobody is aware of that, I think the very foundations of democracy are at stake. When it really comes to environmental degradation and climate disruption, then the very foundation of democracy maybe or probably is at stake. And I think we are not, often people think, yeah, Switzerland is like the best democracy on the world and nobody can destroy it. Yes, of course, it can be destroyed. A second point which is important, I don't think any state could prepare for every eventuality to come. So we will face things that we cannot foresee. And then a third point, I asked myself, what does resilient development mean, or climate resilient development, which is a goal of the Paris Agreement, for instance? What does it mean? Resilience is a word like sustainability. It has a very, very strong meaning, and it's used too often now, so it lost its meaning more or less. But I mean it really in the strong meaning. What does resilient development mean? And the IPCC, as well as the IPBES reports, give not a very clear answer, but they say it's 3 requisites for resilient development. One is we need a systemic transformation, so not just change a little bit, but we really need systemic transformations. 2, we need a plurality of knowledge. Science is very important, but there is other forms of knowledge than just science. We have local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and others. And the third point, we need adaptivity. That means because we cannot foresee what's to come, we will make mistakes. And I think a good democracy is not a system which doesn't make mistakes, but is a system which can always correct its mistakes, always adapt. And I just want to mention 3 ideas which I found quite helpful. One is from a draft of a constitution for the canton of Valais. It's a beautiful draft. Unfortunately, it was rejected in the people's votation. And it had an article saying the state supports all forms of solidarity. And I find this very smart because we cannot foresee what's to come. And if you take as an example the COVID pandemic, Nobody knew what happened. But there have been a lot of grassroots initiatives. And this article says, okay, if we have these grassroots initiatives, solidarity initiatives, the state should support them. A second article, which I like very much, is from the German constitution, the so-called Grundgesetz. It says all Germans shall have the right to resist any person seeking to abolish this constitutional order if no other remedy is available. So a right for resistance. And I think this should be extended to a right to resist any person seeking to destroy the natural resources of life. And the third article, which I like very much, comes from the Constitution of Ecuador, which has the article, "Not nature or Pachamama has rights." Very short text. And the interesting thing is two things. First, it gives rights to nature. Nature becomes a legal subject. And second, it does not say just nature has rights. Nature or Pachamama. Pachamama somehow means also nature, but I say somehow because Pachamama is a word in the indigenous language of Quechua, and the Quechua understanding of nature is quite different from the Occidental understanding. So actually this article takes seriously what the IPC says or the IPPES says when they say we need different forms of knowledge, and also, for instance, indigenous knowledge is really a different way to look at nature. And when I first heard about this, I thought it's a nice idea, but it's so far culturally, and it doesn't fit the Occidental legal system and so on. But then I realized that in the 18th century, the political thinkers of Europe, they have been very interested in indigenous American thinking, not South American, but North American. And they really have been inspired. And for instance, the Constitution of the United States was very much inspired by indigenous native people forms of democracy, because it existed already. Democracy is not an invention just of Europe and Athens, but it has existed in indigenous thinking. And why should we not once more get inspired by indigenous American thinking? Okay, to end just very briefly, the Klimaseniorin was this association of all women who sued Switzerland because it does not enough to protect them. And the court decided in a very, very good decision. It's 260 sides. If you want to read it, a real book. And it was taken, the decision was that there have been 17 judges. It was taken with 16 of these 17 voices, saying that Switzerland violates human rights by not protecting enough old women. And for me, it was quite shocking. And this was also, it showed why we are so far from where we should be. It was quite shocking, the reaction. I expected the political right to say, we don't care about this, and it's just a court somewhere, not even in Switzerland. But it was the majority of the political elite reacting like this. And this I found shocking, that they didn't accept that the European Court for Human Rights is the highest court for Switzerland when it comes to human rights issues. And then the parliament made a declaration. I show you here just a screenshot of the German text, but the title of it, if I translate it to English, is effective protection of fundamental rights through international courts instead of judicial activism. And this word, judicial activism, gerichtlicher Aktivismus in German, this word was coined by the Attorney General of Ronald Reagan in 1985, Mr. Mies, and he was an extremist. he was at that time, I mean, if you go a little bit further back in the 1960s, the Supreme Court in the US said that race segregation on public schools is not allowed anymore. And for the racist, white, right-wing politicians, this was, they called it then, with the word Mies coined, judicial activism. They said these courts are not, these judges are not judges anymore, they are activists. And I was really shocked when Swiss Parliament used this word, and this word is now in the US used again when Trump loses before court. Then the Trumpists say, "Oh, that's not a court anymore. That's activism." And just to give you an idea, we have a good constitution. We have good courts taking good decisions, but then we have a government, we have a parliament which do not respect what's decided upon. Yeah, I already see a question. That's anyway. I want to come to an end here. Thank you for attending, and then I'm interested to hear the questions.
What we said, that a lot of people are misinformed. That's definitely true, but I think also some people misunderstood what the case about, especially politicians, because they were not ruling on the merits, but like on the due process. Like I read the case, and it was more like, because there was so much in the press, I didn't think they read the order at all. It was like that Switzerland violated the due process because they didn't even went into the merit of their claim. They just said, no, it's not possible, denied. Yeah. And that's what, all the way to, and the ruling was just based on that. So, but the European court said is just, hey, you violated the due process, you should have checked that thoroughly and thoroughly. And there was nothing on the merit that like how Switzerland violates like the climate rights of these people, because they wouldn't even check if there was the case. So there's no factual finding on the case because it was denied. And that's kind of sad to see that so much misinformation out there about what the case was actually about. And sure, of course, I mean, the European was right to tell the Swiss court, like, hey, you cannot just deny them, you should hear them out, bring their witnesses, bring up the case. But now it's exactly like you said, it was nothing about judicial activism, that has nothing to do with it. And I think it maybe what is needed is that people get better informed. Sorry, it's more complex.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, the ruling was about 2 points. Switzerland violated 2 articles of the European Human Rights Convention. One was that it did not guarantee the legal rights of these old women because they applied first to the Swiss domestic courts, and they said, for instance, that the Swiss Federal Tribunal, that was really a scandal. The ruling of the Swiss Federal Tribunal said, "Oh, that's a matter of the future, and these people, they are old enough, so they won't live it anymore. There's time enough to act." So they either those judges had no idea, but I don't think they had no idea. What I think they didn't want to take a decision. They knew the association will go to Strasbourg, to the European Court, and then we don't need to decide. Yeah. And so that was the first point, and the second point was violation of Article 8 of the Convention, which says that every person has a right for a family life and a private life, and that was somehow strange. People said, why? What does it have to do with family life? But this family life and private life, also a part of it is health. So it's a right to healthy life. There is no right for environment and climate is not mentioned in the convention, but judges said, okay, all human rights are useless if you can't survive. So therefore, it's important that states must protect people from environmental degradation. And it was the very first decision of an international Human Rights Court, but recently, just short time after it, it was the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which decided a very similar decision. Then it was the International Court of Justice, which did not make a ruling, but an opinion, which said also it is a human rights issue. And there was a fourth international tribunal. It's the tribunal for maritime law, which is based in Hamburg, in Germany, which decides. So we have now four decisions or opinions of international human rights courts. So even if Swiss government decides to be stubborn as up to now and not to act at all, it is an important ruling on the international level. And I was quite, for me, I was quite pleased when the Swiss Federal Tribunal decided not to accept this case, because if the Federal Tribunal would have decided, it would be a ruling just for Switzerland. Now it's a ruling for all members of the European Council.
Maybe then we can give a round of applause. Thank you very much, Marcel. We have further questions in the room, and maybe, I don't know if you can see any hands raised online, but...
Oh, I don't know how to see them, but I see the names of those participating, but I don't see any hands, but maybe here. Yeah.
Maybe just, so first of all, thanks for the very insightful presentation. I have to admit, I'm probably as far as possible from the domain of the law. I wanted to understand a bit, to make sure I understood correctly what you said about the law versus the constitution.
Yeah.
So the law is the one that should be abided by when it goes against the constitution. So is there such a concept as, so we're talking about a law being unconstitutional in other places. So that concept does not exist in Switzerland then?
It doesn't now. Actually, it does somehow. Because the Federal Tribunal, the Federal Tribunal is a constitutional court when it comes to the cantons, which is quite strange. So it is not a constitutional court when it comes to, it doesn't exist. The constitutional court on federal level doesn't exist. But if a canton decides a law which is against the federal constitution, you can sue this law. And this happened in a very important case in 1991. We have two cantons of Appenzell, and both of them still didn't allow their women to vote. And so in 1990, I think it was, the Canton Appenzell-Ausserrhoden decided, okay, now finally women may vote as well, okay, of course. And the Canton Appenzell-Innerrhoden said no. Oh, I mean the men of this canton said, no, we don't need our women. And then some women, they appealed against this decision in Lausanne at the tribunal, the Federal Tribunal, and they won. Of course they won. And so actually this is the same. It was a tribunal which was not within the territory of Appenzell, but which took a decision for Appenzell. And it's more or less the same with the European Court of Human Rights. It's not on the territory of Switzerland, but its rulings are valid for Switzerland, and it can decide about Swiss issues when it comes to human rights.
Maybe if I ask another question, again, I'm not, in this domain, but you saw this article in the first slides. I was talking that Switzerland is, committed to the preservation of natural resources.
No.
Well,
Here it was, yeah, the aim.
exact.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not also not a linguist, but it also depends on what we mean by the term preservation of natural resources. So if we're talking about 100% sustenance of what is there, yes. If we're talking about are we going to have some natural resources in the future, then the bar is very, very low. Because, I mean, yeah, the planet will exist unless we nuke it from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, okay, how is this to be interpreted? Do we mean about, because there was also somewhere else the ability to renew these resources. Again, 100% renewal or 80% renewal or a bit of renewal. So is there any understanding for us here to take?
Well, there is a saying that if you ask 3 legal scholars, you will get 4 opinions. But anyway, no, there is, of course, what judges have to do is always interpreting texts. And that was for me quite amazing. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm studying. I have studied literature, and then I realized it's quite similar somehow, because when I study literature, I try to interpret texts, and that's what legal scholars do as well. But I think, for instance, that the concept of the planetary boundaries is a very helpful concept, because if you want to preserve in the long run the natural resources, you cannot permanently transgress these planetary boundaries. It's not fixed anywhere, but this is up to the courts to decide, and that's what, for instance, the European Court for Human Rights did. They only have to apply the Human Rights Convention, but of course then they had a lot of material from scientists. There have been scientists from ETH, for instance, which were experts at this court. They based also on different other, they look at how do different scholars interpret this. What does it mean? What do we need to preserve? And therefore, I would say it does not mean we can't use natural resources anymore. You always have different interests, and you have to weigh them against each other. And what the Article 73 on sustainable development says, it means that it doesn't mean that only environmental interests count, but it says that environmental interests are more important than economic.
On that, it's like a section like in constitutional history, like how you structure it, like fundamental rights and aims. It's more like you should always consider when the government takes a decision, you should always also consider that as part of your factors, and it's actually an important factor. So like. That means not that it's like absolute, like a fundamental right, but it's always should take part of decision making when a government body takes action.
Yeah, actually, almost nothing is absolute. Even the human rights are not absolute. I mean, there is, for instance, a human right for property, but it cannot be absolute, because even if you possess something, you have a property, you still, there are other interests somehow, and you have to weigh them against each other. Yeah.
It's just like the government, or like the system, the tool to weigh in this factor. It means otherwise it's not explicit, but here's it now. If this is that every government action needs to take this into account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do have very little knowledge on the Swiss constitution, but my understanding is that in Switzerland you also have this, let's say, interplay between the canton and the national state.
Yeah.
And so that's actually a great case study, because you have local actions and so local natural preservation that may go against like national interests or something like that. So how I also guess the canton have either their own constitutions or their own law that might apply. So how do these two interact? And like the national right has the final say of the cantonal one, and how does it work?
It's not so easy to answer on this, because it depends on the field. So sometimes, as you have here the 74, you see here no, 73, sustainable confederation and the cantons. So the federal constitution can give rights or duties to the cantons as well. And then sometimes it says like, actually, in 89 also says within the scope of their powers, the confederation and the cantons shall. And what the scope of their powers is defined in other articles. So actually, if there is usually there isn't conflict because it's clear. For instance,
first of all, is federal preemption, and second of all, every change in the federal constitution must be approved by the federal parliament. So that's why they can make sure that it's compatible. So they usually that's made. In the case they miss it, what can happen because then still the federal court could correct that because there's federal preemption of.
But sometimes it is a field which creates some conflicts. For instance, now it's up to the municipalities to set speed limits, which makes sense, of course. I mean, it's something local. Why should the federal government discuss about speed limits in Zurich or in Winterthur? But now there are some politicians who don't like that Zurich has a government which prefers lower speed limits. And so what now they try to do, or they already did, a federal law which says, okay, you must not reduce the speed limits, which is complete nonsense. But it's just power play, and I'm not so afraid about this because I don't think that the courts will accept it. But we don't know yet because that's a very recent development.
Some belongs to cantons, some municipalities, so we can't look at the history. Then
yeah, maybe, and then Marcel, but yeah.
If you would have one day, because like here you present the Swiss case study, of course, that's what you have studied. So, but like in any countries, anything is different, as you said, the U.S. Constitution, for instance, changed so much. So, if you would have one take, like for I don't know, like countries that have constitutions that are way more difficult to change, for instance. Should we focus on the constitution or maybe just taking actions without necessarily writing it in the constitution, which might be like years of actions, but you have one sentence written and then you realize it was like, it was not so clear actually.
Oh, I don't know. I can't give a general answer. It depends very much where you are and what the situation is. I think what can be said for every country of this on this world is that a law is only as good as the political system which applies the law. And you can have Turkey, for instance, it's, I would say, at least the authoritarian regime, but it has a very, very nice constitution. Still it's authoritarian. Yeah, Marcel.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this very insightful talk, because it's something I think our work really applies, and this affects us, but we don't realize that we don't understand this connection. So it's important for us to learn about it. And I was wondering though, because we see this difference between the Constitution and what we practice, and what we see as the concrete steps as a society now we can take, because there's a lack of awareness, like within our own lab, we're not aware about the Constitution, and the population, that we don't realize how embedded these principles are, and that we violate them regularly. What concrete steps do you see that we could take as a society to bridge this gap?
Oh, I would be happy if I knew the answer. Well, what I'm trying to do is to give presentations or write books, and I mean, not so many people have read this book. My influence is very, very small. I think the Klimaseniorin approach is very helpful, hopefully. Because it showed this clash. I mean, it's really a clash between jurisdiction and politics. It is not many media, many journalists said it's clash between democracy and the rule of law. which I think is not right because the rule of law is part of democracy. But it was a conflict, it was a clash between politics and the rule of law. And it happened in the field of environmental politics, and it happened also in the field of migration politics. If you remember Italy or UK, UK government decided that they want to send refugees to Rwanda, and the court said, no, you mustn't. And Italy said, we sent the refugees to Albania, and the court said, no, you mustn't. And it's not, I think, after the Second World War, it was obvious we needed those rules like the human rights and so because of the catastrophe of the Holocaust and the Second World War. So we had all these beautiful decisions and beautiful laws and conventions. But actually, the governments didn't live by them. And it was possible because the consequences of the politics of this immense economic growth, for instance. There was never such an economic growth before as there was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. The consequences of this politics of an economic growth, they could be postponed to the future or sent to the global south. And now we are in this future. Future is now, first. And second, those people from the global south, they are trying to come to us, to north. And that's why I think it's no coincidence that we have the field of environmental politics and the field of migration politics where we now see these clashes, because it's the duty of the courts to say, hey, you are not living by your own rules. And that's unavoidable. But now my very big fear is if you realize that you are not living by the rules, you have two possibilities. You can say, okay, I change my behavior. Or you can say, okay, I change the rules, or I just don't care. That's what Trump is doing in an extreme way, but others are doing it not so obviously as Trump, but still. And that's my big fear, that all this beautiful system of international treaties and international law may collapse. We will see it in 2 weeks in Berlin when the COP30 starts. I'm really have no idea whether this COP30 will still be able to do anything.
Are there any questions online?
Online?
So
I don't see anything.
I had one follow-up question related to, recently there was this a report that maybe led to an initiative regarding the emissions of the financial sector of Switzerland abroad, so that we have 18 times the emissions that we're financing destruction of natural habitats outside of our own borders. And I was wondering if there is an acknowledgement or addressal of this international responsibility. So it's not just the natural resources within our borders, but what we do outside our borders, because that seems to be violating our constitution very severely.
Yeah. Well, there is actually we have this article 54, which just says in a very general way that Switzerland must contribute in its foreign policy to the preservation of resources. But all these dispositions in the Constitution, they are so general, you cannot directly apply them. You need a law to apply them. And we had a votation about in the EU, you have now this supply chain law. I don't know if this is really the name in English. We had something similar in Switzerland. There was a votation, and the majority of people voted yes. But to change the constitution, you need the majority of the people and also the majority of the cantons, and it failed because it was not the majority of the cantons. But we have, for instance, in the climate law says one of the aims of the climate law is to make the financial markets compatible with the climate goals. It is an aim of the law. And now it's up to the Federal Council, well, the executive, to implement. And it simply doesn't implement it up to now. It's the votation is now 2.5 years ago, and we haven't seen anything.
If there's no more questions, and thank you very much again for this really insightful talk.
Yes, thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.